Hello, Peta Minnici.
Hello, Richard. Nice to be here.
Great to see you. And your exhibition is Looking In, Seeing Out, Bundanon 2020 at
Yep.
Mayspace in Sydney. And really much of the exhibition is about Bundanon, that great legacy that Arthur and Yvonne Boyd left to the nation, and at which you had a substantial residency. How did that residency happen?
Well, I applied last year, and I didn't think I would get a position because I heard that it was quite competitive. But so I was very fortunate to able to get a place, a residency for a month there last year.
Mm-hmm.
So in March, so I went down there, and I had to write a proposal of what I planned to do down there with a couple of examples of my work. So in my proposal, I plan to sort of focus on the interior spaces and the surrounding landscape. And so when I got down there, it automatically, I spent the first day just sort of walking around, sort of looking for a bit of inspiration of what I might start off with.
Mm.
So yeah, so then
So
that
can you
automatically.
can you describe Bundanon a little for us, for viewers who may not be familiar with it? What is Bundanon? Where is it?
Bundanon is a Arthur Boyd and Yvonne Boyd's homestead in Nowra, near the Shoalhaven River, and it's quite a vast landscape and they have their homestead on the Bundanon landscape right in the middle. So it's quite a vast, sort of simple place with the river down the road, and
And there
but it's
are a
really just
series of purpose-built artist residencies on the property, aren't there?
yeah,
With individual studios, not only for
yeah.
visual artists, but also for for choreographers, for writers, for musicians. It's an extraordinary resource.
Yeah, that's right. I met so many amazing people down there, just all the musicians. There was a playwright, there was painters, there was performance artists. So any creative people working full time in the art industry can apply there, which is such a great space.
And when you actually
Yeah.
arrived at Bundanon on your very first day,
Mm-hmm.
you just arrived there. You were expecting, of
Yep.
course, to be able to get in, but what happened?
Yeah. Um, yeah, well, the homestead is locked most of the time, and you're only allowed in there if um, if you tell the caretaker to let you in, and they have to be with you because it is like a museum with all these artifacts
Mm.
and valuable paintings and possessions and ceramics and everything. Um, yeah, so they do have to be with you while they're in there, and they can only let you in sort of at certain times. And plus on Sundays, they do the tours, which the homestead is open for the full day.
Mm.
So I would often work during the day, work on my paintings, and then late afternoon, I would often go for a walk down past the homestead and down to the river and through the landscape pretty much. So yeah, so by the time I usually did my walks, the homestead was closed up. So I would often walk past and end up peering inside the windows to try and get another composition of that sort of those window reflections or those doorways that I could try and capture.
So this is
Yeah.
the thing that you have captured so much in the works in your exhibition. This
Yeah.
sense of being outside this very precious, fascinating homestead creative space, but you looking in through the windows and
Yeah.
seeing those reflections. In fact, let's go to an example from the exhibition first of all, called "Captured by the Light." And well, actually, tell us what we see here, because you seem to be there with your phone, with your camera.
My phone. Yeah, well, this was one of the images which I captured. I think it was one of the first images which I managed to capture with my phone, of a window reflection, because I was sort of experimenting a little bit of getting the homestead through the glass window, if it created anything sort of perceptually interesting for me. And I sort of stepped back a little bit and captured a photo, and yeah, and it had this interesting juxtaposition of half the interior and the landscape reflected back at me. And it was quite like, I remember it was quite a bit of a cold afternoon with not much sunlight. It was kind of a bit grey and everything, so I sort of exaggerated the greys of the colours behind me.
And
yeah,
you are very much a participant in the
yeah,
image as
absolutely.
well, and of course in the resulting painted work. So we
Mm,
are seeing literally through your eyes, or in fact through the photographic image that you captured. It's very clearly, as a painting, a very unapologetically representational but multi-layered image.
yeah.
How does that reflect your general practice? And of course, actually, we can see some of the works behind you as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I think I've always been sort of a representational painter, but I always like sort of finding things that are quite interesting and sort of challenge me, um, as a painter as well. So
How do you
yeah.
make that transition, and what do you think about when you're making the transition from having captured a really interesting photographic image, which you did
Mhm.
in those window reflections? What's the process for you to make that transition then to a painted or a drawn work?
Well, I usually start my paintings or drawings from the photograph, and as the painting progresses in this sense, I like to use my imagination a little bit more to sort of break down the image into shapes and tones. Um, yeah, so I guess, yeah, I like to use a bit of my creativity rather than just making a realistic representation of the photograph.
So, how would you say what's been the history of you developing the visual language that you might have, and where have some of the strongest influences for that come from?
Oh, the influences. Well, I've when I was very young, I used to paint and draw from cartoons on the TV screen and childhood books. So that's where it started off from a very young age.
Yes.
And yeah, so as I gradually went through art school, really, I really liked the post-impressionist work, such as Cezanne, um, and Seurat, the way they sort of broke down an image into painted marks or drawn marks. They just sort of broke it down. So I really love sort of this sense of representation that is sort of can be a bit blurry and
Mm,
hazy.
mm.
So
You
I've always,
mentioned the drawn mark, and of course,
yep,
drawing has been and is a very important part of your practice. You
yeah,
won the Kadumba Drawing Award in 2019. I think you were also a finalist in the Dobell Drawing Prize. You won the John Olson Prize for Figure Drawing a year or two back. So
mm.
drawing does seem to be a very important part of your practice. What, if you'll excuse the awkward
Hmm.
pun, what draws you to that activity?
Um, oh, like I've always loved drawing. I've always really, I think it's drawing's always been a big foundation of my paintings in a way. So I like to sort of use the two together. Um, both like, yeah, and plus it's really, drawing's really good to figure out ideas for the painting, and my paintings usually follow my drawing progress, because I like to, in my drawings, I like to use little marks, such as in pen, as the ones behind me. And so that usually echoes in my painting process as well, where I like to use tiny brush marks as well, so they sort of bounce off one another in a way.
Yeah, the process resonates very clearly through both different media. Let's go to one of those drawn works, quite a large ink work on paper, entitled Inside Out Bundanon. You mentioned making those small marks. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of small marks here, very precise.
Yeah.
This is a very meditative process for you, or do you find it quite a challenge?
Yeah, it is quite meditative for me. I work on the drawings flat, so I don't see the full image until it's either halfway through or completed. So it is quite an intuitive, meditative thing to do for me. I find it quite relaxing.
Are there certain types of images, and I'm thinking of this exhibition, that that you may have felt are more suited to the ink on paper process rather than actually utilising paint?
Yeah, I've always seen the drawings and the paintings sort of as a body of work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've always loved doing both the painting and the drawing together in a way. So
yeah, so there's a sense of connection between them.
Yeah.
But let's go to another work from the interior of the homestead, and it would seem at this stage that the caretaker obviously did let you in. There are a number of interiors which you've rendered in paint, and let's talk about one of them, View to the Music Room. How did you feel once you were able to get inside this historic homestead with its artistic heritage, and you were able to start painting those interiors?
I just found it a really, really sort of fascinating house, and I loved how it was really heritage as well. And yeah, I just found it really inspiring, just seeing all Arthur's and his family's work all there and displayed, and it was quite inspirational as well. So I just sort of began sort of walking around slowly, trying to find interesting perspectives of doorways and windows, which sort of captures interesting compositions of the homestead, with the patterned rugs and the lovely Arthur's paintings on the wall that are really quirky, that sort of add another element to it as well.
Doorways and windows, particularly in this exhibition, seem to be something that you're drawn to, as though you're passing through a number of layers or portals into some new discovery. Was that how it was feeling in some ways?
I've always been drawn to sort of, especially like window and doorway forms throughout my sort of painting, especially masters as well. I just use them as a starting point for the to work around, to work with like compositions. And so I just think it's an interesting entry point into a work as well.
Well, let's leave the interior for a moment and go outside, because as you also mentioned, the Bundanon landscape is quite extraordinary, very beautiful. Parts of it are very wild, down by the Shoalhaven River. There is a painting, and indeed there's also a drawing as well, but there's a painting down to the river. Tell us about that work and its context in the immersion in the landscape.
That work is based off one of the photographs that I did, that I took, because I took a walk with one of the fellow artists there. She's also a painter, and we walked down really late one late one evening down to the Shoalhaven River because she was hoping to get some photos as well. So I was just sort of trying to take photos of like the sky because the sun was going down and everything. So I just managed to capture this one just by accident, really. And I just looked back and I thought, oh, that's quite nice of her, like situated in the landscape, and it's sort of quite vast around her. So we were just walking down towards the Shoalhaven there in the pathway. So yeah, so the landscape is really vast and really beautiful. And I think that's the interesting part of the Bundanon landscape is the colours never change, never are the same during the day. They're always shifting from when the sun comes up, from when the sun goes down. So that's also quite an interesting process too when you're sort of documenting the landscape around you, that it's always shifting.
And how did you feel being in that landscape where so many of the elements of it, like the Shoalhaven River itself and Pulpit Rock, are such well-known parts of so many famous Arthur Boyd paintings?
Yeah, there is that little bit sense of pressure that all these great painters have painted these beautiful landscape paintings, and yeah, so I was feeling, oh, hopefully I can paint something maybe half as good as what they've done. So yeah, it's a really beautiful,
well,
inspiring.
As you said right at the beginning of the interview, you did have a plan for the residency. When you applied for the residency, you were very much going to be focused on the interiors. How much did that plan change during your residency, and how is that change reflected in this exhibition?
I started off with the interiors. I thought, I'm just going to start here, and then as I spent more time in Bundanon and going for walks, more inspiration sort of came to me. Like I managed to sort of find little interesting things like the window reflections and sort of the landscape, how it changes, the lighting sort of changes. I found that quite inspiring as well. So other things sort of distract you from your original plan, which is completely okay. So
it evolves very nicely into something completely different. Let's finish with a work which in many ways does seem to bring many of the elements you've been talking about together. It's a work called The Landscape Reflected, and it does have those elements of reflection. It's also got you in it. But I wonder whether it's actually almost you being a little reflective, because you're not focused on taking the photograph, you're looking off sideways into the landscape. What do you hope someone sees in that work?
Oh, it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to say. I sort of like in my paintings to sort of imply a narrative. I never like to I never like to state the narrative. I also love to leave it up to the viewer to make up their own narrative. So I guess maybe sort of reflecting on Bundanon, maybe like an awareness of the landscape. I guess,
Well, it is.
A lot of elements.
It is very much about the process of reflection. I mean, that's what you've captured so beautifully. Is the sense of reflecting, both literally, but I guess as you're just saying now, also thoughtfully. And just in conclusion, as you look back now on the residency, on that month, what sort of impact do you think it had on you, and how has it helped you form this exhibition?
It's had a huge impact. I think it's allowed me to sort of really challenge myself as a painter, and especially with the landscape genre as well, because I was very much used to painting interiors and still lives. So this is my first sort of proper go at being immersed in the Bundanon landscape. And so, yeah, it was just really nice to do some sort of landscape-based paintings and really challenge myself in my painting and my drawing to explore new subjects.
Well, it's produced some wonderful and, as we've said, reflective results. So congratulations. And Peta Minnici, thank you very much for sharing your exhibition with us.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you. Thanks for having me.